terrible for a while. I was hearing President Bush announce, and hearing this in my ear, I just...
I feel sorry for the country,
Yeah.
but you cannot get,
We're on.
you can have no compromise with this man.
We're on now. You may begin.
I want to come back to Transport AL. In Lublin, they took out all men up to age 50 or 55. That's why my Aunt Rosa arrived without her son, my cousin Irwin, who was a year older than I am. And that's why Mrs. Rotter also arrived without her husband, who was a veterinarian, who was taken out in Lublin together with all the other young men. As a matter of fact, she used to get mail from him once in a while. He worked for the SS for their horses in Lublin until somehow either she didn't get any mail anymore or she left Piaski. Well, I want to correct something. The amount of people who came back from Travniki, and I have this from my old notes, were approximately 500, not 80. I don't know where I got the number, but I just noticed it here.
Let's get back to your experience now. Let's pick
Here.
up.
Out of the June transport in which my parents were, we got later on word, and that was I think official, that 50 men are working in Cholm on a railroad station. And among them was a friend of mine. His name was Paul Morawitz. He was looking for his wife and for my parents and sister. And I think I sent him somehow, or tried to send him some money. Anyhow, the news was that they arrived in some camp and were taken out and sent to Cholm to work. At that time it didn't make any sense to me. But later on, after I went through the additional trouble, I know now what happened. During a transport which arrived in Sobibor, they took out 80 people, mostly who were out of the typographical printing trade. Among them, who was the 81st, was a fellow who noticed that all his friends, and they arrived from a transport from Holland, are there, these 80 people separated, and he asked an SS man whether he couldn't join them, and that SS man pushed him in there. This fellow's name is Jules Skelvis. He is the only survivor of this group of 81 people who was for 1 hour in Sobibor. And I understand now that when the transport of June the 22nd arrived, they needed some labor at the railroad station in Cholm. They took 50 men, and that's why they were there. But those 50 men did not know what happened to those who were left in Sobibor until I talked to Jules Skelvis, who is kind of I would say, a semi-professional historian. And he told me, I don't know you, and I knew everybody in the camp. He says, I was there only for 1 hour, and he explained to me what happened to him. Well, let's continue. During the harvest time, I worked with the hired help of my farmer, Pocharli. His name was Vacek. He worked for 1 year, that was the contract, for food, lodging, and 7 sacks of grain. And at one time when we were working together out there, he told me, when I mentioned my parents, he says to me, "You will never see them again." But he wouldn't tell me any detail or didn't know any, but I think that he knew something what was going on. But what I can't understand, that we never put together what the actual aim of the system was. We always hoped tomorrow will be better than today, but actually it was getting worse tomorrow instead of better. And that's...
In what way was it getting worse for you?
From Boskowitz to Brno, from Brno to Terezin, from Terezin to Piaski, from Piaski, it was always worse. And the end station was actually being annihilated. That was the end result and the aim of the Germans, what to do with us. It was a system which was thoroughly thought out mechanically and psychologically. Well, at the end of October, all permits were taken away from the Jewish people who worked out in the country. And I told my farmer and his wife, I says, "I'm sorry, but I will have to leave because they are taking away our permits." And she told me, "The mister should stay with us and hide in the barn. And we will kill a pig, and we will eat all winter pork and cabbage, and in spring everything will be quiet down anyways, and we'll start working together again." I considered it, but I was afraid. And I left in the afternoon, and on the way to the ghetto, toward me was coming a Polish man. He was drunk, and he couldn't ride his bike. He used the bike as a support. And as we come close, he says to me, "Joe, where are you going to?" I says, "I'm going to the ghetto." And that was in Polish. And he says to me, "Nie chodź ty do getta, tebie zabiją." Don't go into the ghetto, they'll kill you. He must have known something. Well, anyhow, I went into the ghetto and moved into these four ladies into that place. And a few days later, my farmer came with his 2 horses. By the way, he was the only individual farmer who had 2 horses and 3 cows. He was the richest farmer in that little village. The rest had only 1 horse and sometimes a cow, but that was all. He came with his horses with a sack full of potatoes and some lard. Somehow I was alerted he was looking for me, and they found me. I came to the fence. He threw that over that barbed wire fence, whipped the horses and got away so that he wouldn't be caught. That's how loyal that man was to me. I mean, he could have forgotten about me after I walked out of the house, but it was a characteristic of that person. Then there were a few more razzias again. I don't have the English word for it.
Roundup?
Roundups. And we always hid. On November the 4th, in the evening, no, on November the 4th, I went to visit in the other half of the ghetto with some friends. And somehow I missed the closing hour of the 2 ghetto doors, and it was past 8 o'clock when they were closed for good until next morning. And they tell me there, "Why don't you stay here, whether you sleep here on the floor or there, it doesn't make any difference." I says, "No, I want to go into my place." I came to the gate where there was no police. On this side of the gate, ghetto gate, there was no police, and it was locked with a long chain. There was some leeway between the 2 halves. Also in the bottom, the corner was bitten out by dogs, and there was a little of a ditch-like, and I crawled through I came across the street, knocked on the gate on the other side, and they asked me who I am, and I says, I live here, I forgot about the time, and I'm late, let me in. And they let me in, and I came to Mrs. Weiner, to Miss Frisch, who their name was, and at 11 o'clock, there was a knocking on the door. By the way, we slept in clothing, with all whatever we had in a little satchel or rucksack, whatever it was. At 11 o'clock, somebody knocked at the door, and they told us that the last man who had a permit to work in the country as a saddler on another big estate was brought in by police, which was interpreted as a very bad omen. At 1 o'clock at night, we were alerted again to go down into a hiding place. The hiding place dated back long before the First World War, when the local people were sometimes using it to get protection during the times of pogroms. That part of Poland was Russia before 1918. You had to go into the regular basement, and in one room there was a sand floor. At one of the walls, where the sand floor was, there was a box hidden in the sand, which was also full with sand. If you lifted that box, there was a shaft. You crawled down and then forward, and now you were beyond another wall into a secret room, which had also a sand floor, so that if you walk in there, they wouldn't hear anything. And the last person took that sand box, put it in place, and since the room was half dark anyways, you couldn't see. You couldn't, if there would be traces, even you couldn't see. And that's where we went, some 20, 25 people. A nephew of Mr. Goldfarb's, by the way, with us were the two sons of Mr. Goldfarb, Mordechai and Abraham. They were both, I think, painters. Or one was a locksmith, and the other one was a painter. A nephew of Mr. Goldfarb's, of the owner of that house, it was a pretty sizable house, wanted to come in there too with his baby. But they told him he couldn't come down because if the baby starts to cry, he would give away all the other people. At 6 o'clock in the morning, we could hear the voice of one of the Judenrats, Kurt Hirschmann was his name, who yelled, and we could hear it in the basement, alle aus den Verstecken, all of you out of the hiding places. Piaski wird Judenrein. Piaski will be cleaned of Jews. And we sat tight and quiet, and everything was all right. Until maybe 2-3 hours later, we could hear. By the way, where we were, there was an outlook in the room from where you crawled into that room. You could pull out from the inside a stone out of the wall and see what's going on. 3 times the SS and the policemen came to look and didn't find us. And suddenly we hear an axe working on that box. They pulled the box out. A Polish policeman crawled into that room and he commanded us to come out. And what actually happened, the fellow with the baby was found, and he gave us away out of vengeance, which actually saved me the life for the second time during 24 hours. Because later on, I found out that those who didn't come out from their hiding places, and I would have been in the hiding place with the other people in the other half of the ghetto, they didn't come out, they didn't find them, but they bombed all these homes, and the basements were, imploded like, and the people died there in these basements. So if the guy wouldn't have given us away to the Germans, we would have been later on suffocating in that basement anyways. We came out and we got a good beating and were put into a huge mass of people who were already assembled and waiting in the big yard of the ghetto. The two sons of the Goldfarbs were in lead of that group with tied hands, and when we got in, our group, we were the last ones. We started our march toward Travniki. That march was again horrible. The Germans mobilized some in villages, some farmers with their carriages, where they loaded the sick and the half-dead, and those which they killed on the way, shot them on the way. They were all thrown on those carriages on the way to Travniki. I said to those ladies with whom I walked, I says, you know, it seems to me like we are walking on our own funeral. I got hit over the head by a Ukrainian. These were renegades of the Russian army who thought that they will have it better by the Germans, and they were used, in this case at least, as guards against Jews. I was hit with the butt of a rifle in the head and got a bad nose bleeding. We finally, while it was raining all day, got to Travniki, and there was another mass of people waiting from Izbica, another town where there was another ghetto, and they were squeezing them and forcing them into this cattle train and then us. We finally were in the cattle train under whipping and hollering, and it was terrible. Squeezed like sardines, you couldn't turn around. And then the train started to move. We were glad that they closed the gates and they put seals on them, and the train started to move. We didn't know where we were going. The train stopped quite a few times at night, but finally around, I believe, 4 o'clock in the morning, it stopped for good. We, of course, wondered where we were, and I crawled, or rather lifted myself onto the small window of that. There were two windows on each side of that train, of that car, and I saw in the darkness, some towers. And I said and I assumed that we were in a minefield, in an oil minefield, where they have oil fields or oil towers, rigs, and that we would be working there. That was my imagination. But by the way, I want to come back to the ghetto, where there was a family. The man was also a Judenrat. He was an engineer by profession and an expert in making fruit wine. One day the SS came in and gave him orders with his wife to come with them, and we only found out that he was taken out as an expert for fruit wines. With him lived also, as I assumed, one niece, but there were actually two of them, and there were no nieces. I got in touch with a lady in Israel only about a year ago who wanted some information from me on her relative, a brother. And during corresponding with her, she told me that she knows of a people who were in Piaski in the ghetto. Their name is Böhm, and they live in South America. I got the address and I wrote to them whether they are the Böhms, that engineer and his wife. And I got a letter back from her. I have it with me. The lady is over 80. Her husband just died. They were the only survivors not from of Polish nationality, from the ghetto of Piaski. He worked in a plant making fruit wines for the SS. The girl, who I thought is their niece, happened to be in the same transport as they, and their family name was also Böhm. And they took them with them. But they did not come out when he went in this new job. And one of them got shot on a cemetery in Piasky, and the other one, she wrote me also where. So that is the story of the Bem family, which is just a coincidence what happened to them and to me. And it came into my mind when I wanted to tell you that for two reasons it was good that I went into that other basement. Well, we arrived, and then the train started to move a little bit again, and the gates opened around 6 o'clock, and we were commandeered out of the cars on a ramp, and from there we walked down. And as what we saw was really very attractive. Little homes, little front gardens, nice little bushes, and girls looking out from these homes. And we were walking, and while we were walking in this complex, I noticed that these were not oil rigs, those towers. These were watchtowers with guards on top. As we walk, an SS man whose name was, as I found out later, Hermann Michel, gave us a speech, and he said in German, of course, which heartless mother left her little child in that car there and is exposed to starvation? Isn't there another woman who would have a heart and take the child? And Mrs. Rother says to me, Kurt, you think I should go? I says, go ahead. And she says, I think if God saved me up to now, he will help me with that baby. She came back with a naked child, about a 3-year-old boy. It was very scared. But the woman who left it there, I found out later too, figured nobody will notice the child, the train will move out, they'll find the child, and somebody will raise it. Well, anyhow, as soon as we got deep into the complex, we were separated by sexes. Children up to 6 went with their mothers, and boys older went with the men. Now I could see in this big yard, there was a group of women on one side, and Mrs. Rother with a little boy on her arms, and we were in another section. And then we were marched off, and by the way, Mrs. Rother just moved her shoulders like asking me what's going on. And I did the same thing. I don't know what's going on. Then the men were marched under some kind of a big roof. I can't give you any more description, but they were looking for artisans and for certain experts. They took out shoemakers, I believe tailors, electricians, glaziers, people who put paints into the window, and then they asked for textile experts. And I raised my hand, and this officer with an SD on his cap, which means Sicherheitsdienst, security service, says to me in a Viennese dialect, "Von wo sind's? Where do you come from?" And I says to him, "From Brünn, from Brno, the textile center of Moravia." And he motioned to me, he says, "Get out, come raus." I came out and joined the other group of these other men. And we then, there was a group of approximately 50 people, were marched away into another enclosure. And there I have noticed that one man with a whip was beating another young little fellow. But I didn't know what was going on. And in this big yard, we got coffee, bitter coffee, and I think some bread. And I was kind of walking around in that yard and got in a corner where the fence, the barbed wire fence, was braided with coniferous twigs. And I hear women cry and yelling. And then when I looked better, I could still through, I saw silhouettes of naked women running. In the meantime, that fellow who beat the other fellow came to me with his whip, and he says, "Get out of here, it's not good to be nosy." So I left. Later on, I found out that he was beating the other fellow because he had the guts to go to some assessment and tell them that he would like to have his wife to help him whatever he will be doing. And the assessment really got that woman out. That man's name was Jacob Peltz. We called him Mitzelmacher, which means he was making caps. That was his trade. His children went into the transport, but his wife got saved and she worked with the women whatever their task was. Then at noontime, groups came of laborers and there was food served for them. They got soup and I don't know what else. Potato soup, I remember for sure. Yeah, and in the evening we were getting 10 men a loaf of bread and some marmalade, which was actually made of beets. But these groups of people who came in, after they ate, they stood up into formation. We, the newcomers, were put into these formations, 3 across. Then they counted all of us, and we were led back to our stations, where to work. I landed as a textile expert in a place under roof where there were piles of luggage, suitcases, bundles, boxes, you name it. And our job was to sort this luggage by quality, but also by kind. For instance, shoes, ladies, men's and children. Men's suits, again, jackets and pants, and if there were vests. And the task was following. First of all, we had to take off the Star of David, if there was any, and empty all the pockets so that there would be nothing left in there. And we were told that there are 3 classes, rags, used, and new. And we have to bundle slacks, I believe 20 or 25 pair to a bundle, jackets I think 10, the shoes were tied together, and on both sides of that place where we sorted and farther back, there were compartments built out of wooden poles with doors, and everything else was barbed wire. On the outside were big blankets so that the rain and the snow couldn't come into these enclosures. And that was full of goods which was sorted while we did that, and that was after the victims actually who perished in Sobibor. In that same afternoon I got a pair of pants, slacks, from a fellow who was in the transport, and his name was Josef Aufrecht. Not from Boskowitz, but his wife came from Boskowitz, and he came with her there and came into the transport to Terezin and later on. And I recognized the pants because they had an elastic on the bottom, which his wife put in to protect him from the cold weather. That's for that they needed textile experts. There I worked for a while. For 3 days, I could not conceive what's going on. As a matter of fact, when this, which was a capo, that man was a capo, who chased me away from that spot where I was, I walked away, I see a girl. Her name was Bertha Kolek. She came from a little town not far from Brno, and her father used to be the mayor of this little village. And what struck me then later on, the mayor of Jerusalem is also Kolek. And I wonder whether these 2 Koleks were related or not. Well, when I see Bertha, she worked among the 10 Czech people on that estate. I says, Bertha, what's going on here? She says, you should be glad that you are here because the food is much better than where the other people went, and you will be working here and you'll be all right. She arrived there a week before me, caught into another surrounding, and that time they took out a few women as launderers, and she was among them. And I questioned her father, and she got tears in her eyes and ran away. Well, it seeped through to me that actually what happened, the people as they arrived, They were sorted by sexes. They were told to undress, to tie their shoes, so that they wouldn't be mixed up when they go into the bath to be disinfected. And then they will get fresh clothing, and they will be going to some jobs. What actually happened when after they undressed, they chased them into the gas chambers. And that's what I have noticed with these women. And Mrs. Rotter went into that baby there after the speech of the German that there should be a woman with heart who would save the child. And that was the end of the transport. For 3 days, I couldn't grasp what was going on until I realized that I'm in a factory in a death factory, where we are just as instruments being kept to work for economic reasons. The whole was an economic enterprise next to the gas chamber, which was in camp number 3, where we could never enter. Once you entered camp number 3, you never got out. There was also a group of Jewish slave laborers who had to drag the dead people from the gas chamber, and in many cases taking out their dentures, the gold, and then either throw them onto a pyre, and if there were more corpses than the capacity of burning, then they had a earth-moving machine there which dug deep trenches where they threw the corpses, covered them up with soil, and when there were no transport coming in and they had an opportunity to burn these people, they undug these graves again and took them out and put them on the pyre and burnt them, and the ashes were being loaded in barrels. I have seen some. You could even notice a little pieces of bone within the ashes, and that was sent to Germany as fertilizer. That went on all the time until when I escaped. But in the meantime, I noticed there were 2 groups of people, the one which looked pretty healthy yet, and the other one which were really emaciated. In the meantime, they opened a little warehouse which was not bigger than maybe 3 by 3 yards, with boxes full of small items like brushes, wads of wool, fountain pens, pencils, you name it, little items. And I got a job to work and sort the stuff in there, together with another fellow. His name was Alfred Friedberg, from Frankfurt or close by. He was a shoe expert. He worked in a shoe factory, and I think also prior to that in an umbrella factory. He was one of the real older people taken out from a transport, for what reason I do not know. He must have been at that time in his 40s or maybe 50s. We worked in there, and I got smart right away because I knew that we smuggled money in a brush. If you perhaps notice, there is the backside of the brush which hides that part where the bristles are attached to the brush. We took this at home apart, put money in there and closed it up again. I opened a brush or 2 and there was money there too. And we collected a lot of money. But the next day after we were there, or even the first day, an Ukrainian guard came in and he picked up a few pencils and a fountain pen. And the next day he brings us Polish kobasa, this is a sausage, and a liter of vodka. And I don't know how it came to the amount, but I says, how much? He says, somehow the amount of 800 zloty came about. No, 800 mark. And we already had money from those brushes and from the wads of wool. We very often unwound some, and there was money in there too. And I gave him 800 marks, the money which we were supposed to deliver to the Germans. And he brought us every second day 2 pounds, 1 kilo of sausage, and 1 liter of vodka. He worked with the horses, but he was only supervising the horses, or rather the laborer. The man who worked in the stable was Samuel Lehrer. He owns today a limousine in New York. He got away. and I got acquainted with him very well. I know his wife, his children. So that's what it was, until they closed up that warehouse. And I noticed that there were people who looked pretty good and others who were, as I said, emaciated. And those who were emaciated, they lived on what they got from the Germans to eat from the SS. By the way, these little homes which we noticed coming from the ramp were the quarters of the SS. And the girls who looked out were the Jewish girls who were cleaning up the rooms. And that was so deceiving to us, the whole thing. It was all figured out to the last crossing of a T, how to deceive the people. Now I got back in the sorting department. In the meantime, I got sick. I got high fever and was very weak, and during a loading of a freight train, which was not on the ramp but beyond the ramp, we dragged these bundles of clothing from these compartments, from that warehouse actually, onto the train, and I was so weak that I hardly could make it. And an SS man whose name was Kurt Richter from Karlsbad, maybe you heard that name ever. This is a resort in Bohemia, Western Bohemia, world famous. He pushed me in a latrine, I think twice that day. Twice I crawled out and somehow made it back into the barracks in the evening. And I got some help. This Bertha Kolek, she had somehow access to some extra food and brought me a little bit. And my friend Chaim Engel, who also survived, helped me a little bit, I believe. At one time, I don't know where he got it, but he brought me a bottle of wine, I think. Anyhow, I made it. And in the meantime, transports were coming in so often. There was no schedule. They brought in a transport at night, a small transport, I remember at one time when I went to get something, but that was already in the early fall, but I wouldn't like to forget it on that episode. While I was walking through the yard where the people undressed, and by the way, later on they built also a barracks where the women were put in, and there was a group of what they called barbers who went into that barracks and cut the hair of all the women before they went into the gas. Even that was utilized, I think, as a mattress filler. I think so, for U-boats, for submarines. I forgot my thought. I mean, I would have to wait a minute because I deviated now.
Yeah.
Would you tell me what I said?
Talking about Chaim Engel.
About what?
Chaim Engel helping you?
Oh, yeah. Then later on, I was still pretty weak, and we were running information in the yard of the camp, and this one SS man, Oberscharführer Frenzel, had with him a St. Bernard dog. His name was Barry. And he chased the dog at those who couldn't run fast enough. And this dog bit me in my side here, but I had a lot of clothing on. I had a sweater, a jacket, and a top coat, and he didn't go through. And then later on I recuperated, and in the meantime I hear a rumor that the Germans want somebody to take care of the sick Jews. Up to then, whenever you were sick or you told them that you were sick, you couldn't do anything, they took you right away and they said, you go into the Lazarette. They took you into Camp 3 and there were shot, and that was the end of you. But now, for their own benefit, to have a smooth going, because we already knew exactly what to do and how to do it. And also they wanted to save, although they didn't have to necessarily do that, but there were trade experts. There were cobblers who made shoes to order and boots. There were tailors who made clothing to order. There were goldsmiths. There was a shop of over 30 carpenters who made beautiful furniture. And the SS, who after 42 days of service went for 18 days on furloughs and dragged every time anything they could get and ordered in the meantime from these shops. All these shops were in the camp number one, where we also slept, and where there was the kitchen, and in the center was a artesian well where you pulled the water with a long rod, a pole, on the end of which there was a hook, and you let a wooden bucket go down there and then pull the water up. That was camp number one. There were barracks for women and barracks for men. I was in the camp, I believe, a few weeks. I was still kind of a greenhorn. I still worked in the sorting. In the morning, they counted us 3 times a day. In the morning, there was an appel, and they counted us, and at noontime, when we went back to work, and in the evening, before we were getting to the barracks to sleep, to find out whether there's anybody missing. This one gray morning, I would say it was the end of November, maybe in December already, there were 2 men missing. One's name was Miller. I forgot the other one. One of them was a carpenter, and the other one was a bricklayer. One of the 2, I don't know which one now, had a broken arm. And this Schafira Michel, who was a male nurse, actually fixed it for him, put it in a splice and bandaged it so that he still could work somehow. They were very important to them because they were building something. These 2 men, during a rainy night, dug a hole in the sandy ground under the fenced wires, and in the morning they were gone. So during the appel, the Schafira Frenzel noticed that 2 are missing, and he at random took, I believe, every 10th, and he had 20 men now to be shot for the 2 who got away. Somehow, after a while, another SS man came. He was the second in command. His name was Johnny, they called him Johnny, Johann Niemann. He came from Friesland, which is a border region in eastern Germany, between Holland, I believe, and Germany. And he never spoke a word. He had his nice little whip, always in gloves, perfectly dressed, and he walked so slow that you thought he might lose his balance. It was amazing how he walked. And he goes to Frenzel, and they talk a little bit, and they cut the amount of the 20 to be shot to 10. And the 10 people then were taken away. Why Niemann cut it to 10, I don't know. Nobody knew. And we didn't know what kind of a person he was. Allegedly, he was a nephew to the head of the SS, Himmler. Allegedly. I don't know whether this was true or not. But that was the first time anybody tried to escape at night. And it cost 10 lives. Could you shut it off for a minute, please? I wanna see hear a few notes.
We can just pause.
Okay. I just don't want to use up the tape for nothing. Yeah, well, I forgot to tell you, for instance, that when we were in the ghetto, it was the last few days. People were afraid to get even water from the other part of the ghetto because they were constantly rounded up, and we bribed other people to get us the water. Not us, we were in the same place, but those who came from the other side, they had to bribe people to get them to get them the ghetto.
Yeah. Let's not worry about that. Let's get to.
I don't want to forget anything which is characteristic and important.
The Sobibor story is very important,
Yeah.
and that's what we really
Well,
need the details of
what else was going on there?
that.
Yeah.
You know what we can do is come back at the end, and you can.
No.
There's some time.
That's all right. I remember now what I wanted to tell you. There was a rumor that the Germans are looking for somebody who would take care of the sick. And at that time already, one of the first transports from Holland, from a camp called Westerbork, were arriving always on Thursday morning or latest Friday. Once a week, they came a transport of 60 cars of regular trains with 40 people in each car. That was 2,400 people. And that started somehow in early March, I believe, or mid-March.
Excuse me, where are we now?
In Sobibor.
All right.
And these people too, they arrived, and if they needed somebody, they took him out, and the rest went right away into the gas chambers. I remember at one time, they let some women sing Dutch songs, gave them postcards to write to whoever at home. And after they did that, they went into the gas. Now, among the people who were taken out from one of the first transports from Holland was a Dr. Nink and a Dr. Subies. There were two MDs, and prior to that, there was in the camp a Dr. Breusler, a Polish Jew, who was a dentist. And these three men told me that they heard that they will be looking for somebody to take care of the sick. And they would like me to take on the job, and they will help me as much as they can, but they were not allowed to do anything for the Jewish people. Shortly afterwards, at the appel in the evening, Frenzel asked for somebody who would be able to take care of the sick. I raised my hand, and he says, "What is your name?" And I says, "Kurt." "And how did you acquire any knowledge?" I says, "I was a medic in the Czechoslovak army," which was not true. But I needed some alibi, and he bought it. He told me I will be taking care of the sick, and the rule was a Jew can be sick for 3 days. If he is sick longer, I have to deliver him, that patient to them, tell them about it. Fine. According to knowing the, I would say, the mentality of the Germans, I immediately set up a little cartothek, I don't know what you call it in German, a little file system. And I wrote down, Barney so-and-so got sick on the 12th, and when Barney wasn't right on the 15th, I tore that card up, and on the 16th I wrote another one for 3 days. Once in a while, they came to the barrack. Sometimes they asked me, how many sick? I says 14 or 9, whatever I had. And in most cases, they didn't even check it. But sometimes they went to the barracks, and I had to call their names, and they had to answer. So they knew these people are there. That happened, I would say, during the whole time, and I was there from November the 6th until October the 14th. Maybe it happened 6 times. I don't know exactly. Maybe 5, maybe 7 times. Oh yeah. Now then, I occupied now on camp number 1 a little hut, a little building with a stove of Dutch tiles. The thing was not larger than maybe 4 by 4 feet. It was a little home which they disassembled, a log home, out in some village and brought back into the camp and assembled it there. I don't know what was there before I was told to be in there and do my job in there. There were also many other buildings in the camp, like for instance the administration building, which is a real huge home, a log house, which was disassembled and then assembled again in there where the Germans had their administration. Then there were a few more where the artisans were, the carpenters and the people who worked with paints and with tools. They had barracks. The carpenters had the last barrack. There must have been over them quite over 30. And the whole camp was actually a state in itself, because the SS had their jurisdiction. There were the judges, the executioners, and they did whatever they felt like doing to their own benefit. And they were also interested into a smooth flow of the whole operation. So now I am the medic who takes care of the sick. And I protected the people. I also was allowed to bring in from another warehouse, which was in camp number 2, where the sorting was done, Vaseline, cotton, and bandages. I got very friendly with a fellow who worked there. His name was Leon Halberstam. Halberstam or Halberstadt? I can't remember now. I would have to look it up. He brought me once in a while things which I was not allowed. And I also smuggled in things. I was allowed to go there every second day and took other things too which I was not allowed. And I want to tell you a very interesting story. One day I have my little satchel with the stuff over my back, and I walk from camp 1 into camp, from back camp 2 into back camp 1, back into camp 1. And I was thinking, what would you say if Gustav Wagner, who was the roughest of them all and very cunning and very smart, if you would now meet him, what would you tell him? And as soon as I finish that thought, I can hear him in the back. Kurt? And I turn around. Yes, Schaffer. What do you have in there? And I says, cotton. And he says, and I says, bandages, and iodine, and aspirin. And in the meantime, as we walk, we come into camp number 1, and he says, spread it. There was a table on 2 posts with a border cross and 2 benches. I poured the whole thing out, and there was a box with cotton. And he had a steel rod with which he walked. And he pushes the thing around and hits that table, that the objects which were there, they virtually jumped up. And he said to me in German, "Du hast Schwein gehabt." That means you were lucky. That is a German idiom. He was an Austrian. And he walks away. And if he would have opened that one box with the cotton, he would have found there a can of sardines. And I wouldn't be here today if he would have found that. That was really another lucky coincidence.
You know, I think this is a good place to stop. We have to change the tapes again.
Okay.
So let's
Is it
stop.
already an hour? Okay. Okay. Change it.
Wait, we have 7 more minutes.
We do?
I thought you said... I thought you said 4 minutes to go.
Hold on. I have to see where I am.
We have time for one more story then.
Yeah. Oh yeah, when I was in the camp, one day I asked for permission whether I may get a coat out of the new warehouse. And there I found, and this SS man was one of the nice ones, says, "Go ahead." I walk in there, and there was my new winter coat, which my father took along from the ghetto. It was amazing. So now I knew they left on the 22nd. The routine was gas on the 23rd. And when I think of my sister and my parents going to the gas and the terror and the dehumanization, it's just terrible. It's very hard to explain it. I knew on the 23rd I have, according to the Jewish religion, Yahrzeit. That means you light a candle on the day of the death, the demise of whoever your relatives were. That's what I found in that warehouse, my raincoat, my new winter coat. There was another thing which was very interesting. There was a girl with who I got acquainted from Holland. Her name was Minnie Katz, spelled with a K though, from Haarlem in Holland. A girl, she spoke Dutch, German, French, and English. Very educated and very fine person. One day she comes to me and she says, you know, Kurt, I found some money today. I says, what did you found? She says, dollars. I says, how much? She says, $2,000. Where did you find it? In a pot, in luggage. There was a pot tied up with some rope on the top with paper, and when she opened it out, there was that money. I says, what did you do with the money? She said, I threw it in the latrine. Now, I didn't want to tell her, if you find money, bring it to me, because I had channels where the Ukrainians, who you could bribe, brought you stuff. But this is what happened once in a while. What else happened in the camp? Oh, yes. Once in a while, the SS men came, usually Frenzel, and asked me for the sick and took them away. And we never saw them again. They were shot. But on October the 14th, on October the 11th, I think it was a Monday, he came and he wants to see the sick. And I had 14 of them at that time. One fellow's name was Federgreen, who had frozen off toes. He couldn't walk, because if you lose your toes, you lose your balance. And he was in there too, and he took them away, and he recognized a few who he saw during the last inspection, and he knew that I was cheating. And as he takes them away, he says to me, "Du kommst nächstes dran," and he raised hell. You will be next. I don't know why he didn't take me at the time to make number 15 out of the 14. That was on a Monday. On Tuesday, he sees me running across the yard, and with his whip, he notions to me, "You just run, I'll get you anyways." That was another warning. The following day, it was already organized to start with the uprising, which didn't happen on the 13th, it was postponed by the 14th. But that I will tell you on the other tape.
Okay, where are you?
During the winter of 1943, which was a very severe winter.
Going back?
Yes. We experienced a visit of the head of the SS, Himmler. I remember seeing him with a group of the SS people who were in the camp constantly. And he was a short fellow with dark glasses, dark rimmed glasses. Very nice. In uniform, he arrived in an armored train, and he left the same day. But the day after he left, the Jewish cook, whose name was Johanna Koch, she too came from Frankfurt, just like Friedberg, was dismissed because he told them probably that a Jew cannot cook for them because there's an opportunity to poison all of them, you know. So I don't know who replaced her, but that was one of the things which I forgot about the camp. Another one was, I have been hiding all those months two people. One was Joseph Siegel, and the other one was Kiewe Hertz. Two inmates who had difficulties walking because they too had frozen off toes. And whenever we were counted during the formation time, they were in formation and they counted them, and as soon as it was over and the groups marched away, they disappeared in the barracks. And I kept them there for months. As a matter of fact, Joseph Siegel got out of the camp, but he didn't make it later on. Kiewe, I don't know whether he made it. So one day we are in the barracks and I chat with them down there, and Kiewe brings couple of roasted chicken. And I says, Kive, where did you get those chicken? We started to eat them. I says, I found some money. He says, where did you find the money? He says, here in that post there's a hole and there was a few $100s in there. When Frenzel took away my last 14 patients, no, at another time, I'm sorry, that was prior to that. When Frenzel took away at one time a group of people, I think at that time there were 11. Among them was the fellow Federgreen. I made a mistake there. He whispered to me, where his messer is, dort ist das Geld. That means where the knife is, there's the money. When he marched away with these, I believe, 11 men, and had them killed right in Camp 3, I went back where Federgreen slept. He slept on the first tier of the 3-tier high, what I would call them, lodgings, and above him there was a knife in the board above him. And I pulled the knife out and pried away, and there was a few $100s there. I didn't say anything to anybody. I put them in the place where I slept. There was a hollow in the post, and I slept on the highest berth. Put it in there. Kive found that money, and he bought a chicken smuggled through an Ukrainian, and then actually that money legally would have belonged to me, but I didn't tell him it was my money because there was no need. But that's how I ate at one time chicken in the camp. These are unbelievable things which can happen. Well, anyhow, 18 days before October the 14th. Oh, yet I want to come back to Westerbork. Out of Holland, we got approximately 15 transports, each with 2,400 people. They were coming in from March until, I believe, into May, either on Thursday morning or Friday morning. And there was also a transport from France and from Belgium, I think. And these people, of course, the same thing happened to them what to the rest. But there was a group of people which was called Waldkommando. That means forest commando. There was a group of 72 men. No, there was a group of maybe 30 men who went every morning out with a couple of horses with a carriage, and they were felling trees, cutting trees down in the forest, and brought them back as fuel into the camp under the auspices of a couple of Ukrainians and an SS man. By the way, the SS kept 4 horses in the camp. Very often they let some of the people crawl up the tree with a rope to tie it on top so that they can pull it down then. And many times they pulled the tree down before the man came down, and he got badly injured. And in the end, I kept him for a few days, but it was just horrible. They went to death. One day, at the evening appel, there came an SS man, I think it was Gomersky, with a few Ukrainians with automatic guns, and Frenzel gave the order all Dutch men to come out from the formation. There were 72 of them. And he looks them over, and there was one whose name was Max Van Dam, an academic painter. And he says, Maler, kom raus. Painter, come out. He was just about working on his portrait. The rest of the 72 were marched away in what do you call it, on a double, and were shot. We found out later that somebody either told them or they assumed that the Dutch are organizing an uprising. And that was the result of either a rumor or the giving away by somebody else who wanted to ingratiate themselves to the Germans. That was that case. Then another very important incident. The original capo when I arrived was a Moishe Sturm. And there were under him a few other capos. Among them there was a fellow, we called him Bunye. His name was Benjamin Katz. And then there was another one whose name was, I'm smiling because you are wondering if I remember the names. But I remember, there was another one who we called Reiwitzer. He was a young kid, maybe 18, 19 years old. And they all had whips. The Reiwitzer's name was Herbert Siegel. And the name Reiwitzer he got from the local people, from the Polish Jews, because he came from the little town of Rajowiec. So they called him Reiwitzer. These three men, one Sunday, got hold of some vodka, got a little drunk, and caused a tremendous upheaval in the camp. On Sundays we didn't work. And they also were talking about escaping, running away. On Monday, I think at noontime, Shafir Frenzel came and took these three men away, and they were shot. And he nominated immediately another capo, and maybe some other capos, but I remember only the one who he nominated to be the head capo. He called himself Berliner. He came from Berlin. His name was Herbert Nathaniel, of Polish parentage. He talked the perfect Jewish, which I did not. I talked only Czech and German. And he was very happy that he got the job. But somebody saw him entering that day the administration building. And he told them what these three guys wanted to do. And that was the end of their lives, and he became now the capo, the main capo. But he was really miserable, a miserable, nasty person. And one day, while we stood information before the SS came to take us away, he said, I take you all into Camp 3, that is in German, that is the gas chamber camp, and I alone will see Berlin after the war. And that did it. There was a fellow whose name was Schleumich Meissner. And I'm telling you only what I put together and what I heard. I didn't talk to Schleumich about this. He got a hold of a lot of money, put him in a pair of socks, went to Oberscharführer Frenzel, gave him those socks, and started to complain about the Berliner. I don't know what story he made up. At the next appel, Frenzel raised hell with the Berliner and told him to lie down on a bench which he had to bring. I was on that bench one time too. I got 25 myself. But he got at least maybe 100 whips from Frenzel and from other couples. So he really got it good. And then he got exhausted and sick and tired and beaten up into the barracks. And a couple of days later he was dead. And as he was carried out on a blanket, wherever they passed other people, they spat on his body. That was the end of the Berliner. And they nominated another fellow. His name was Spitz, S-P-I-T-Z, from Vienna, who was a real decent guy. Now the difference between Sturm, who used his whip excessively anyways, and the Berliner was that Sturm would never denounce you to a German. He was the big shot, but he never would do that. And he had deep down a feeling. But to keep on top and to save his own, he did pretty erratic things. He hit me at one time with a pole with which the water was pulled out of that where the water was, the source of the water. And there was a long pole with which he took that pole one time, I don't know why, and hit me over the shoulder, that it broke. The thing was at least that thick. Broke on my shoulder, and for a few days I could hardly move my arm. But then we were again good friends. I mean, he was just, you couldn't figure him out. That was the difference between the Berliner, who was really a traitor to his own people, of the worst kind, as Sturm. As you can see, nobody complained about him that he wanted to run away, but this one guy, he did, because he probably felt that he will be promoted. Well, anyhow, Spitz was a guy who had no energy. He just walked around among the laborers, and only he was not too long, maybe 6-8 weeks, the main couple. So in the meantime, after all the Dutch transports came in and other transports, one afternoon I walk to get something from Camp 2. And there is, in the morning, and there is a little pile of clothing. And on top of that clothing, there are 2 photographs, pretty big ones. A wedding picture of my boss's daughter Ilse and her husband Siegfried Löfberg. And the second picture was Ilse's 2 other sisters, Ruth and Lydia Brill. So I looked at the pictures. I don't remember whether I took them or not. But anyhow, I knew that that night these 4 people came into the camp. And that was the end. What else can I tell you about what happened in the camp and what was of interest, the picture, the situation? Well, at the end of summer, no, it was later than end of summer. It was the end of September. A few more transports came. One was big. There were some Czech people in it, but they came from, I think, from Bialystok, from a city deeper in the territory, east from us. Among there was a fellow whose name I remember, a Czech named Stransky, and this Otto Sander, who was a young kid. And I was working ambulantly in that little hut, and when the Russians came in, a group of, I don't know, maybe 60, 80 people, they had some spunk in them. They were not terrorized. They knew that the Germans can be beaten. And whenever they marched in their own formation, they used them for, I don't know anymore what they did. They were singing Russian songs. It's beautiful how they sang the Russian songs. And they right away started to figure out to get away. Now, we knew that the German front is coming closer. At that time, I would say they were maybe 400 kilometers from our camp, because we found in the sorting room a little radio, which they smuggled into a barn. And there was an electrician from Germany, his name was Schwarz, who strung an antenna, and now they were listening during the working hours in that barn, while somebody was always watching whether nobody's coming in, what was going on. And we knew from these news that the German front is coming closer and closer, and we have 2 choices. To wait until they come close and then we will be liquidated, as it happened to some other people from camps who were workers in other camps and were liquidated in our camp, or get away. And there was already some talk among the old-timers. And when the Russians came, the thing ripened. There was a Russian officer, his name was Sasha Pechersky, Alexander Pechersky, who laid out a plan how to do it. I was approached by Fellhendler, who was one of the senior, I would say, elders, whether I would also like to come into the committee and whatever, prepare for this. And I says to him, I tell you something. I will help as much as I can, but I do not want to be involved in any meetings. And the reason was I just felt that I am more secure the way I am, and I am doing plenty for the other people. As a matter of fact, up to that point I was the only one who risked my own life for the benefit of whatever I could do well for those who claimed to be sick or were sick. Well, the plan was to kill the SS in individual spots, because they used to come to pick up their boots, their clothing, whatever. And there was one who took care, who was a supervisor with the horses and so forth. That was the plan, and then we would get the room where there were the weapons, the armory, and arm ourselves and walk out from the camp like an armed unit. Of course, it didn't work out that way. On the 12th of October, the women who worked in camp number 4, where they were sorting and cleaning ammunition which was brought in from the front, and it was ammunition from Russia. They were supposed to bring in a few hand grenades, but they got afraid, and among those women who were supposed to do that was the wife of Jacob Pels, the man who we called Mitzelmacher. They didn't bring it. So we postponed the uprising from the 12th to the 13th. And on the 13th they were to bring it again, and they didn't again. So the decision was made, we have to do it tomorrow, like on the 14th, because on the 15th Wagner was coming back from his furlough, and with him around it would be much more difficult. Around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I was told by one of the people who were on the committee, or whatever you want to call it. I really don't know how it was organized, and I didn't want to know, but I was told to watch Spitz, who was the top capo, so that he, if he sees something not going the way it should, wouldn't go and report. Personally, I didn't feel that it was necessary, because he was an honest man, and he was a good man, and he wouldn't have done it. But I kept company with him until about 3:30 or so. And then I let him go and went back in my little hut. And in came Leon Friedman, who had two professions. He was a young, strappy fellow. He was a shoemaker, a cobbler, and an electrician. I think he came from either Warsaw or Lodz. And he, at one time, had a big boil in his groin. When the groin, he couldn't walk anymore then, and I let him lie on his berth in the barracks, and when it was ripe to be opened, I got from the barracks anesthesia in like a spray can, and I sprayed it and killed it, opened the thing, got all pus out, and gave him some bandages. In a couple of days he was down on his feet. When the day came of the uprising, from then on he was bringing me gold coins, which he, as a shoeman, as a shoe expert, was finding in the heels of some shoes. And he just brought me today 2, and then 2 days later 3, whatever. And I was putting them in a jar and buried in the sand behind one of the barracks. On the day of the uprising, a day before, I took a spade, took the jar out of the ground, and put it in that little oven which was in the hut where I worked. By the way, with me at that time was also one of the Russian soldiers. These were POWs who were brought in the camp. A fellow who was a barber, but he wasn't with me there at daytime. At daytime he had another job. Then after 6, when the work was finished, he shaved those who wanted to be shaved in that same place. Well, on that afternoon, around 3:30, Leon Friedman comes into my hut, and I pull out a jar, one to you and one to me, and we divided that money, and I put mine in a sock. I put it in my pocket, he put it in his pocket, and he came with cleats. He was very upset, very nervous. I says, Leon, you have a job to do. Gather yourself and do it now. And he kissed me very fervently, and he walked out to that pole, which there were wires on, and he put the cleats on. I think he put the cleats on in the room where I was yet, and he walked there, got to the pole, put his belt around the pole and started to climb up the pole and cut the telephone wires, so the SS wouldn't have any communication with the outside. That was his job. Where he went, what happened to him, I don't know. The last time I saw him going up on that pole. Then a little while later, during the next hour or so, individual laborers who somehow could get away were gathering in camp number 1, where they were not supposed to be at that time yet, because they were supposed to come when the day was over at 5 o'clock or whatever in winter time, together with the whole group. And there was an accumulation of people, maybe 50, 60, mostly young people. Suddenly, a Ukrainian comes on a bicycle. He was what we call Volksdeutscher. He was actually of German heritage, son of some probably German farmers who came under these czars as a farmer, he was a child, or rather an ancestor of these farmers, but they still spoke a bad German among themselves. His name was Alex Kaiser. He came on a bike into the camp through the gate, and as soon as he entered the gate and got deep enough, a group of young boys went at him and stabbed him to death. The bike was lying there, and he was lying here, and there were 2 barracks close to each other, and I look and see that there is a guard on the tower which could have seen what's happening, but somehow he probably did not, and I dragged this man with another fellow, I don't know who the other man was, between those 2 barracks, so nobody would see that he is dead and what happened to him. I had blood on my hands, human blood. It was a very, very horrible feeling for me. Anyhow, more people came, and prior to that, there was a real eerie quiet in that whole big yard, on which there were about 6 or 8 barracks, the kitchen, and all these shops. And there I see Shlomi Schmeissner running diagonally from one corner of the yard into his shop with something wrapped in a blanket. And then these people were coming into the yard. Well, anyhow, by 4:40 or 4:50 or so, the carpenter's job was to come out from their shop and storm the armory. Oh yeah, but prior to that, the following happened. At 4 o'clock, Untersturmführer Niemann had an appointment to fit a suit. Exactly 4 o'clock. And as I explained before, he came on a horse. The horse's name was Zilli, a brown mare. Her name was Zilli. There were 4 horses, but I remember Zilli, and I think there was another one, Ima. And he gets off the horse, and right to the gate there was also a bakery. And the baker's name was Israel. We called him Srulek the baker. And he says to the baker who looked out, "Baker, keep the horse." And Srulek took the horse and is holding the horse, and he walks just as slow as ever with his hand on the back and his whip, and enters the tailor shop. And as soon as he entered, they must have hit him over the head, and that was the end of Neiman. And Stroleg knew that he wouldn't come out anymore, and as soon as he opened the door, he hit the horse on the ramp, and the horse turned around and ran out of the yard back to its stable, wherever it was. That was the only SS man I have seen walking to his death. But altogether, I think 11 were killed. Now then comes the carpenters. Kaiser was already dead, and the carpenters go to the fence and try to storm it. And a salvo came from the other yard, where the Germans lived and where was the main entrance. There came a salvo of machine gun fire. How they knew or why they did it, I do not know, and I don't know whether anybody knows or ever knew. They got scared and retreated. And I was behind them, and I said, "Breda noch einmal." And I gathered them, brothers, once more. And they tried once more, together with the other crowd. But another salvo came, and the fences were too solid anyways. Behind the fence, a few yards farther, there was the armory, where we wanted actually to get the weapons. And they turned around and ran along all these shops to the fence. In the corner between the last shop, the carpenter's shop, and the fence, at the end of which, as we could see, was a tower with the Ukrainian guard. In the corner, hidden behind that carpenter shop, was an improvised ladder. 2 pieces of wood with ranks across. I didn't know of it at the time. But suddenly that ladder was up the fence, and the people were scrambling in a tremendous chaos to get on that ladder and under the fence and just away. Now I'm in my hut, and I'm watching that Ukrainian, what he will do, whether he will start shooting or what. And he was just standing and didn't react. And the yard was getting empty and emptier, and then he picks up his rifle to prepare to use it. At that time, a shot was fired next to my hut in the mechanic's shop. That was Schleimisch Meissner, who stole a rifle in the barracks of the Ukrainians. He shot at him. He didn't hit him. Whether he heard that bullet pass by or whatever, he put his rifle back to his foot. When he did that, I said to myself, now it's time for me to go. And I ran to the ladder, got over on top of the ladder and jumped down into the minefield, but nothing happened somehow. We have, of course, tried to neutralize it long before. Whenever we could, we took a stone, threw it over the fence into the minefield, and sometimes we hit a mine and it exploded. Sometimes a rabbit probably exploded another mine if it was heavy enough, I do not know. But that's what we did, but I got through. And as I ran now, behind me was Schleimisch Meissner with a rifle. I only found out later. He was the last, and I was the second before last who got away over the fence. There was a dead girl there, her name was Myra, shot by the salvos which came from the other yard toward that spot where we were running away. And as I walk fast, I run first and then I only walk. I took over a passed up Jossel Sieger. And he says to me in Yiddish, he says, "Kurt läuft, Kurt run." And I says, "Jossel, I don't run anymore, I'm a free man." But of course, that was euphoria. We were not free because we had nothing. We were exposed to the dangers of being caught by the Germans or delivered by the Polish population, whatever. But anyhow, I felt that I'm the big hero, I was free. And I land in the forest, which was called the Forest of Owls, which in Polish is Sobi, which is an owl, and Bor is a forest, Sobibor, that's where the name comes from. Somebody came to me there, it was half dark already. He had a little shot he was a little damaged on the calf, and I bandaged it. I had bandages and stuff with me. And then Chaim and Selma, the girl was from Holland, from Zwolle, and he was from Lodz, Chaim. We are there, and many didn't make it. My friend did not make it. I was waiting. So then they say to me, Kurt, why don't you come with us? And I felt that there are two, a third isn't necessary, and I says, no, I'm going on my own. And this Otto Sandner, a young kid, maybe 18 years old, said, I'm coming with you. He was from Czechoslovakia, also from Moravia, and he came with one of the last transports, must have been maybe 5,000 people, taken out for labor. So we walk. By the way, then small groups were founded, formed, and each went on his own. There was no more cohesiveness. So we walk through the forest, and when we were far enough, we tore from trees a few branches and lie down. We were exhausted. The next morning, it was already daytime, we were awoken by the bells of cows who were going on pasture. When we got up, it rained at night, we were wet, and walk again in direction away from the camp. And I had two plans: to go either to the farmer, if he would save me, if he would hide me, and if not, I'm going farther west to Czechoslovakia, to Moravia, where I knew a lot of people and where I was friendly, and I trusted some of them that they would hide me. So as we go, we suddenly see a little house, in the front of which, or on the side, there was a pile of manure, and there was a young fellow working on the manure. And I says to Otto, you watch here, stay out, and I'll go in and see whether we can get some food. There was a woman in there. I says, I'm hungry, I want food. She got scared, and I says, we would like to have butter and bread. And she says, I don't have any butter, but I will send my son to the Scholtis, which is like the mayor of that complex. They have homes between the fields. It is not like a village here. There is one home here and another one far away, which belongs in the vicinity to their own fields, you know. So she sent the boy to get some butter, and Otto came in, and she gave us some black chicory coffee and some bread and cottage cheese. And when we are through with eating, we were watching whether this fellow is coming back alone or with somebody else. But she says, where do you come from? In Polish. And I talked some Polish. And I says, oh, we are from Czechoslovakia. We worked for the Germans in a camp, and we ran away, we're going back home. And she tells me, you are Jews who got away from Sobibor, where they are burning the Jews in Polish. The Żyd koch palio. That means that they're burning the Jews. Well, I didn't have any discussion with her. Otto stole the knife with which we were cutting our bread, and we left. Oh, pardon me. I gave her, from the money which I had, an old Zaristic 10 ruble piece, gold, which she recognized. And she gave me Polish currency in paper as change. It was either 60 or 80 zlotys. And we left. And we walked that day, and whenever we saw a farmer in the field, I went there and I says, Ktorim kierunku, that means in what direction is Lublin, which was approximately west of us. And they tell me like that. We never walked on roads, but always only through fields or, if necessary, through a forest, because we didn't want to be caught by somebody in a car, by a German, you know, whatever. And that evening, the first night, we slept in a hayloft. in the fields. It was nothing but 4 poles with a thatched roof and full of hay, and when we crawled up in there, there was a berth. Somebody slept there before us because there was always also an empty bottle there. So we lie down and we slept, and the next morning we did the same thing. Again we asked, where is Piaski now? And during the day we came to a river. It was the river Wieprz, which means boar in English. And that was hard to cross, but we had to cross it. So we walked a little bit along the river. It was November, cold. We would have to swim it. It was rather deep and not very wide, but still. And there I see a boy, a young boy with a boat. I says, come here and take us across the river. He says, I'm not allowed to. And I give him those 80 zlotys which I had, or 60 zlotys. He takes the money, he puts us on the boat and takes us across. I want to tell you, there were so many coincidences which was pure luck. One of them doesn't work out and we are licked. So then we got food in some homes, and that evening we went in the evening before we went to sleep in another farmer's house, and we knocked at the door and we asked for food, and we got some food. I think the people were giving us food, they were afraid that we would avenge ourselves or whatever. Not out of goodness of their heart, at least I don't believe so. Then we went back into a meadow, and in the meantime it was already half dark, and we hear shooting. We assumed that the owner of that house now went out to scare us away, to tell us that he has weapons. Well, anyhow, we didn't have any such ideas. We just wanted to survive. We get into this meadow, and there were small piles of hay. They handle the hay entirely differently than in this country. The hay is rolled. Over there, they put it together with forks, make little piles, and then when the weather is convenient and they have the time, they take those piles and put them on carriages and bring them back home into a barn. I remember we took 2 or 3 of those piles, put them into one pile, and each of us crawled then into this one pile and slept through. In the morning, when we awoke and crawled out, it was raining all night, and we were dry like bone because the water was running down on that hay. I didn't know that until I found out in my own experience, but the meadow was so water-soaked, as you walked in it, you could hear the swishing. So that was the second night. Then that was, I believe, Sunday. Well, anyhow, the next night we slept again in a hayloft. But I am not sure, but I think we slept 2 nights in 2 haylofts. And that was Sunday morning when we got out again. And as we walk, we see a single home again. And as we approach it, to the left, there was like a burnt-out home. And I walk over there, and there were some remnants of Jewish prayer books. So I knew that this was a home occupied by Jews who was burnt down. And to the right, and forward a little bit, there was a horse behind the fence of a house looking at us. And in the meantime, a man comes out. We approach him, and I says to him, we would like to get some food. And he says, come in. I was very suspicious. He gave us good white bread, preserves. This is no joke. He gave us hot water to wash. I shaved with his own razor, with his safety razor, not with a straight razor. I knew how to do that. And we got dressed again. He didn't ask us a question. He knew what's going on probably. I gave him some money, a gold coin, and we left. That was Sunday. We slept one night in the forest, one in a hayloft. one on the meadow, and the last night again in the hayloft. But I forgot now the sequence exactly. It was Monday morning, and we are already close to Piaski. And in the meantime, I explained to Otto everything about this farmer. He has a daughter. She goes on the bicycle to Piaski. She works in a bank, whatever. And I tell him all these circumstances, get him acquainted with it, and I also gave him at one time a few coins, gold coins, that if he has to go to shop or whatever, that he would have money on him. That afternoon, and I must tell you, don't understand at all. I have a very bad, miserable, impossible sense of direction. I can get lost in my town easily. I can go in the wrong direction in my car until I find out that I should have gone the other way. Anyhow, we come and we are in Sedliski, in the outskirts of Sedliski, in that little village. But it was still daytime. And we lie down in a ditch. And when it gets dark, I'm going to try to find my farmer's house. And I landed from the back at his barn at the exit of the yard. And on that yard, there were two more farmers. One was Kiselevsky, and the other one Sokolovsky. They knew me and I knew them because they were all friendly, you know. They lived on that big yard, but only my farmer had a barn there. Coming in from the field, the barn was to the left. In front of it was a dog house. To the right was his stable with the 2 horses and 3 cows. And then there was the pigsty. You say pigsty or stay?
Pigsty.
Pigsty. And then was in front of it a little shed. On the other side was another stable which belonged to those 2 other farmers. In front of it was a pile of manure, and on the other side, in front of that shed, there was also a pile of manure. And then there was a little yard-like fence, and to the right-hand side was one of the farmers living with his family, a mother-in-law and 2 or 3 children. And on the other side was my farmer in a thatched roof home like all those homes were. It was Monday night, and it was already pretty dark. As I passed the dog, his name was Caesar, he recognized me. He didn't even bark. He just moved his tail and sniffed at me, and I petted him, and I continued walking in the yard. And I opened the little gate to the farmer's little front yard, you know. And I look in, and there I see a petrol lamp, and they are eating, which they baked every Monday, that was a Monday, sweet bread. I mean, not sweet breads, sweet bread baked in their own oven, and chicory coffee. They baked the bread for a whole week's supply every Monday, but they made one loaf which was mixed with sugar beets and poppy seed, and that was the sweetness in it. And they ate that, and then on Tuesday up to the next Sunday they ate the dark bread. And I see, and I am waiting now until he will go and make his rounds to let the dog loose and to lock the barn and the stable. A little while later, the day worker, his name was Joseph, came out. He didn't see me. That's how dark it was. And he walks out and walks away through the little gate. And not too long later, the farmer comes out. And I says, Gospodarzu. That means farmer. I called him farmer. But this is, in the Polish language, it is like a title. That was respectful, you know. And he says to me, Gdzie ty se tu bierzesz? Where do you come from? He recognized me right away. In the darkness with that one word which I said, Gospodarzu. And I says to him again in Polish, I came to save my life. to you. And he says, Marno. He says, in vain. And then he says, Chodź se mną, come with me. And as I walk with him, he says, I owe you some money. That's how decent and honest he was. He owed me money for that suit which I sold him, 700 zloty. I says, I don't need any money, I have a little money on my own. Where do you come from? I says, I ran away from a concentration camp. He put me in the stable with the horses, locked it from outside, came back in a little while with a bottle of hot coffee. Yeah, by the way, Otto was left in the fields. Not too far, but maybe 100, 150 yards. And he says to me also as we walk to the stable, he says, Ale ty sam jesteś. That means, but you are alone. I says, yes. I figured if I say we are two, I have lesser chances. He put me in the barn, and then he come back later on with that hot coffee, with that sweet bread, and with a little carpet. And he put that carpet in the stable on the floor, on the straw, next to the horses. And he says, I'll see you in the morning, early in the morning. And I drank and I ate and lie down on that. That was a home woven carpet. This is made out of rags. You tear the rags into strips and then do braid it between the waft, I believe you call it in English. It wasn't bigger than maybe a good yard long. I lay down there. At night I awake when one of the horses got loose and smells at me, and that woke me. And in the darkness I knew where he's supposed to be, and I got up and got that horse. By the way, there was a beautiful mare. It was a half-blooded mare. When she walked, the head up, it was a pleasure to look at that horse. The other one was not so lively, but this one here, I loved that horse. And I took her back to the trough and put a halter on, and lie down back on that, wherever, when I found it, the carpet, and slept. He came around, I don't know, 5 o'clock in the morning. It was still dark. And he took me into the barn, across the yard, kitty corner-like, into his barn. And I crawled up on the ladder, then when it got a little bit lighter, high up in the stacks of straw or whatever there was. In the afternoon, the farmeress comes with a bucket in which he had hot tea in a bottle and bread with lard. He gave me the food and told me that they had visitors at night. Some people came, and they were, she said, some kind of a little bit acquainted, because they knew that we have a daughter, Tolja, and they have a bicycle. She has a bicycle, and they wanted that bicycle. I knew right away what happened, but I didn't tell her. Otto must have bumped into some group of people, and he told them what I knew about this farmer. And they came to ask for the bicycle. And he must have joined that group probably, or maybe they did away with him. I do not know. But I never found Otto, because I later on inquired in that town from where he came whether he returned. I didn't get an answer. So that was the arrival in Sirlišky.
We have only about 10 minutes.
All right.
Can you tell us briefly what happened?
All right. I was in that barn, and during the next few days, Wacek, the man who used to work there for them at the time when I was there the first time, the year before, wasn't there anymore. They had this time a maid, and she comes into the barn, and I was down there, and she sees me. Well, then the farmer comes, and he tells me, she saw you. I says, yes. Well, he didn't complain. He says, I'll take you Monday in the pigsty, up on top, which he did. They brought me food either in the barn or over there, then later on in a bucket, always 3 times a day, breakfast, at noontime, and at dinner. On that Monday early morning, he took me from the barn again across the yard, and I crawled up a wall in the shed there, which was the wall of the pigsty. And he told me to go down deep there. And then later on, during the daytime, his day worker, who he hired, the same Joseph, he was bringing straw from the barn, and he was with me up there to fill in all the holes so that the wind and the cold wouldn't come into that enclosure now. Joseph did not know that I'm up there. Only the farmer. And when he was done with the job, he went down, and now they started to feed me up there. There was some firewood, like in front of that wall, on which he always stepped, or the woman, the farmeress, and then they gave me the stuff, and I came up from where I was lying down there, got the bucket and the food, and I had there a bucket which I was using as a toilet, which he emptied once a week, which I gave him, and he poured it on one of the two piles of manure. That was my comfort. And that's how I lived there. I could not stand up. I was kneeling in the center only. Even that was almost as high as my head was, because the roof was very low. And I told him that I would like him to buy me 3 things. Change underwear, a blanket, and a revolver. And I gave him a couple gold coins, and he brought me a change of underwear and a blanket, but he says a revolver he can't get. So now I had at least that blanket in which I crawled in, I made like a sack out of it, and into the straw. And there I slept and rested all day and all night. I never went down the whole time from October the 21st, I believe, until the very end of July. I had a few experiences.
We don't really have time.
Then I will tell you then what happened while I was on the roof.
Please, we have 5 minutes.
Okay. Gee, I worked without those notes. I'm sure I forgot many things.
That's okay. Tell us what happened on the roof and then liberation, would you? Because that's really all we have time for.
Okay.
Okay.
10:25, I have a note. From barn to pigsty. Joseph, straw, for Charlie with me. Money to get underwear, blanket, revolver.
Okay. Just tell us about liberation, would you?
No, is the new tape already
No,
on?
we don't know. We have 5 minutes.
Oh, and that's it.
That's it. So
Well,
please,
anyhow.
Tell me about
As summer went along, I could hear machine, rifle shooting, and farther away also cannon shooting. The front was coming closer. And every day it was closer and closer until one day I see my farmer. I look through the thatched roof on the yard and I see him loading a carriage to go into the fields. And in the meantime, I hear an explosion. A shrapnel was going above and then it exploded. And the farmeress got very excited. And she was holding a cup of something in her hand. And he says to her in Polish, "Don't be excited, afraid of those who do you hear. They go far away. Those who explode in front of you, those who don't hear." They didn't go into the fields. A day later, a German tank went through this yard, and another day later in the morning, there were Russian soldiers with little carriages and horses and women soldiers, we called them Marushas later, in the yard. And then they left too, and about 2 or 3 days later, I went down. By the way, I was so weak that I hardly walked, but I did. And when we parted, he told me, "Don't go through the village. Go into the fields. Because if they find out, the villagers, that I kept the Jew, they'll kill me." That's what he told me. And I went back into the fields toward Piaski, and there Russian soldiers got hold of me. And then they made a PW out of me for a while or whatever. And then I got away from them and I smuggled myself through different situations in Poland until I came home. That is the end.
Well, thank you.
You're very, very welcome.
When did you come to the United States?
I came to the United States on February the 4th, 1948. That's
Thank
it.
you very, very.
I thank you too. I think that some of these things should be preserved. Mainly, you know, the person of those two farmers.
Oh, yeah.
They were
that's
noble
right, sorry.
people. I was a lucky guy. They were the heroes. They were the decent people who, out of so many millions who took advantage of the Jewish people, really tried to save my life.
Right.
At one time he told me, when he came back from a wedding, a little bit drunk, he never was otherwise, you I will keep to the end of the war. Anybody else I wouldn't take for $1 million of zlotys in gold. And as he talked to me, I was coming out from my hiding place and I could smell the vodka on him, but that was the only time. These were two fabulous people. I am in touch with the daughter. Todja, yeah. I forgot you when she brought me at Easter at one time a basket with vodka and cookies. She lives in Lublin and we are in touch.
Sounds like marvelous.
These were one in I don't know how many. If only somebody would interview me to write about them, not about me, about them.
About them. Yeah, no,
They deserve
they're
it.
quite something. They sure do.
They do deserve to be remembered in history.
They do indeed, and they will be.
Well,
Yes. All right, so wait a minute, we
das
have
ist
to
alles.
unhook you.
Oh yeah.
I'm going to let Kevin do it.
I'm glad it's over myself. I'm hungry.
You must be hungry, tired.
No, not tired. Hungry.
Your wife is here, your
Yeah,
friend
I
is
know.
here.
Yeah.
We're not going to time for the phone. I'm going to take it. I would like the photograph you gave me of them.
Yeah.